The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us on a snowy Sunday evening in southwestern Ohio as winter storm has come rolling in. And as long as we can maintain power for the next 75 minutes or so, we'll be with you with another episode of Music Weekly. It is Music Weekly episode number 47, episode 125 of the Nerdcast Empire. And we've got the music of December the 20th to talk about. Only 2 weeks left worth of music before we'll have gone through all the music of 2024, and we'll start looking at the music of 2025. Also got a new feature this week. We'll just tease this week that we'll be doing coming up in about 3 or 4 weeks' time, but we'll tell you about it this week on the Nerdcast Empire. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going pretty well. We are nearing the end of December, finally moving into 2025 music in a couple weeks. Definitely worth noting how few new releases seem to come out here right at the end of the year, and I'm hoping fairly early in January that number picks up, because while it was nice having less music to listen to on a holiday week, it also gave us fewer options as far as what to highlight.
For sure. And, we're clearly, this is the first winter into, the beginning of the year that we have done this podcast. So we are learning that clearly the last few weeks of December and the beginning of January is not a prime time to release your albums, because there were only a handful on the list, which I will put in the chat a little bit later on, all of the new releases for this week. And there are even fewer next week. So we'll see if we can manage to give you 4 new albums next week. We may have to add a few more news items next week to fill in.
With a new gimmick of some sort.
We might, which we are, actually. We'll talk about that here in a moment. That'll be coming up at the end of our news segment today. We'll tell you a little bit about something that's going to be coming up. Great to have Rachel and Chris in the chat, hunkered down, trying to avoid the snow, although I'm sure everybody enjoying having the kids out in the snow, probably. Certainly is a good snowstorm for that. We've already gotten about 4 or 5 inches of snow here in our area, and we're looking at maybe another 7 or 8 before the night is done. So nowhere to go but sit inside and listen to some music and talk about some music, which is what we're going to do on tonight's edition of the Nerdcast Empire. We're going to get to some news items first, and the first news item is kind of an interesting one, and it's not so much a singular item as it is kind of a multifaceted article. This was in Blabbermouth, and it talks about Matt Sanders, who, of course, most people know better as M. Shadows of Avenged Sevenfold, their front man. And it really is a very detailed piece talking about what touring is like, even for a band that's as big as Avenged Sevenfold. The headline is a little clickbaity, talking about how hard it is for Avenged Sevenfold to make money on tour right now. But when you get into the article, you kind of see where the headline comes from. And it basically is a combination of everything is really expensive. Tickets are really expensive. There's the resale market, which he has a really good section on, talking about how, this dynamic pricing basically raises the initial cost, but that money's going to the artist. Whereas if they charge a low rate initially, then the scalpers buy them and then they mark them up. So the markup goes to the scalpers. But at the same time, he doesn't feel it's ethical to say, well, you can't resell these tickets, because that's just not how things work. So the whole article is just really outstanding. And I think it's definitely worth a read and a good, just kind of deep dive on the whole concert scene and ticketing in general, I think, even beyond concerts. And I think since we've talked about this topic kind of off and on throughout the year, I thought this was kind of a good way to maybe sum a lot of that stuff up, and kind of curious to get your thoughts as you went through there, because, again, I think this is a pretty well thought out article and interview that M. Shadows does here.
Yeah, I was always kind of the opinion that these guys were pretty sharp as far as the business, but this interview certainly confirms that. It's kind of wild to hear that even for an act of their size, making a lot of money on tour just isn't really something that happens these days. But kind of interesting, too, when he talks about the idea that for them it's better to kind of tap new markets, even if you're not making much money or working at a loss, in order to basically build a new fan base. He mentions Indonesia specifically, where they went from kind of not being known there to that being like their second biggest market as far as where people are from that listen to Avenged Sevenfold. But he makes the point that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where the person's from that's streaming your music. You're not going to make a lot of money off of each of them, but you're making the same amount of money off of each of them. So, you could play the same tours in Europe, same cities over and over again, or you can find places like Indonesia or India where, these developing markets that you can introduce them to your music and at the very least get a small amount of money from a new demographic, essentially.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And also a chance to just take your music to places where people probably never thought your music was going to go. And those people are generally more excited to see you live because they just think, well, this may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to see this band in person that I never would have thought would have come to my corner of the world. And the other thing, he talks about is, he mentioned kind of not maybe doing the same tours, but he also talked about some of the money logistics around some of these big festivals. He specifically mentioned Rock in Rio, where he talks about, you got to get your whole crew in there.
You got to get pyro in, but you can't get pyro from Brazil. You have to get it from, Germany and have it flown in.
And you've got, a 38-person crew that's going to be in a hotel for 5 days, and they're going to be eating and all the expenses that go with that. And then you have the show itself. And so there's a ton of money that it costs. And he also kind of goes into the topic that we've talked about on the podcast, where you have these festivals that are now basically saying, look, we have to sell out almost immediately. And if we don't, we're just going to cancel, because the only chance we have of making anything, or at the very least breaking even, is for us to sell immediately, because we can't run the risk of going farther and farther into sell dates and not selling those tickets. And then we can't pay all the bands, and we're going to end up in the red, and we're going to go out of business anyway. So unfortunately, it seems like that is kind of the new math that's behind all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from the consumer point of view, for us, it's always so easy to just assume that the ticket brokers are the bad guys in all of this, and they're the only ones out there making money and being super greedy. But, to your point, he does talk about, all the expenses that go along with it, as far as the traveling and paying your crew, and the whole thing about the resellers I thought was interesting, where it's, I'm all for people being able to sell back their tickets, but that shouldn't really be a business.
Yeah. And that's just it. If you keep ticket prices reasonable, that scalpers are going to buy those tickets up, and then they're going to make all the money off of it instead of the artist.
Yeah.
Because like he says, if you ask the average fan, the concert goer, who do you want to make this money? Of course you want the artist to make the money and not the ticket broker. But, at the same time, if you charge these high prices, then people don't buy the tickets in the first place, and then you don't have a concert. And so it's just this kind of ongoing thing, which is, it's a very complicated situation. And I think it brings up, the point that we've talked about, that I think going into 2025, you're going to see more of these bands decide to take up a residency in one location where they can bring everybody in, they can set everything up once, they can do 2 months of shows. I'm sure Vegas is looking at these kind of things with dollar signs in their eyes. Not that they're not always looking at things with dollar signs in their eyes in Vegas, but there's going to be more bands wanting to go in there and just hang out and stay for a couple of months and that way, or more of these augmented reality shows that we've talked a lot about, where you're just almost having holograms set up and play.
You can watch fake ABBA live.
Yeah, I mean, but, again, once you've got the initial cost covered, then you're making profits. Or, is it a case where you do both? You have a residency, but you also have this, maybe residency in Vegas, and in Atlantic City you have this augmented reality show. So you kind of have both coasts covered. It's the economics of it is fascinating, and it's going to continue, I think, for a while at least, to be a hot button story. And it's like he said, and he kind of summed it up. It's like everybody can just agree to lower prices, but at some point it's got to start at the beginning. And,
hotels have to be cheaper,
yeah, gas has to be cheaper.
Everything leading into the actual putting on the show has to be cheaper, or else someone's getting screwed in that situation.
Yeah. So it's, it was a really fascinating read. I thought, with us only doing 2 news items today, it was kind of a deep dive type article. I encourage everybody to read that. I thought it was really well thought out, and I'm interested to see kind of what the concert scene looks like as we go through 2025.
It was such a better response than just the typical, well, Ticketmaster's evil and they hate you. I
Yeah.
think, like, not to suggest that they don't bear some amount of blame, because they
sure.
very well might, but we're all adults here. Let's go over the true logistics of all of this, and come to find out that everything's more expensive now. Why wouldn't this also be?
Yeah. So interesting to see. Obviously, Ticketmaster certainly, they don't get a pass.
No.
They certainly
But,
have done some sketchy things, but
to some degree, I think even the artists have to take a look in the mirror and say, what can we do to really make sure that we're providing the most value to our concert goers? Because I would feel pretty bad if you go there and you find the band's just kind of phoning it in. Like, I want to see something special that this tour in 2025 I'm getting that no one else is getting.
yeah. And of course, that goes back to, if you go get something special, it's gonna cost more money to put on a concert that's more special, which means it's going to cost more money to see it. Like, it's just kind of this, never-ending cycle, basically, which is kind of the point of this article. So definitely check that out. Really, really interesting read in Blabbermouth. Maybe a little less interesting, but just kind of funny because of the timing of it, is our second news story. The story that Joey Belladonna and his new band, Classic Rock, featuring Joey Belladonna, of course, the legendary vocalist of Anthrax, who we just talked about on the podcast, and members of the Dutch classic rock act The Clarks, played some shows in the Netherlands back in December. The article has the set list and a lot of covers of classic rock songs. And, it's just funny because we spent a lot of time, and everybody should go back and kind of hear the whole discussion again about Joey Belladonna and his interesting relationship with the band Anthrax. And I think this kind of, when I read this, my immediate first thought was, Joey Belladonna is just making sure he's got all of his bases covered in the event that maybe, something happens with Anthrax again. This guy's going to continue to go on and play music and have a good time. And I would have to think, just because of how good of a vocalist he is, that these concerts were probably pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, name recognition, vocal ability. Why wouldn't you want him guest vocaling for your string of concerts? That's a no-lose situation for the band. Yeah, you kind of look down the set list, and it's pretty much a who's who of 70s and 80s rock royalty: UFO, Bad Company, Whitesnake, Queen, Rainbow, Scorpions, Bryan Adams, all over the place. Just a really cool set list if you like classic rock. But, this also kind of reminds me of Anthrax's Anthem EP that they released back in 2013, where they covered Rush, AC/DC, Boston, Journey, Cheap Trick, Thin Lizzy. Like, clearly, based on that, you assume the band itself, but certainly Joey Belladonna, based on this story, really big fans of that era of rock, and the guy certainly has the pipes to pull off all of these songs.
No question. And have to think that that's probably where a lot of his vocal inspiration came from, is a lot of these great frontmen of these bands back in the day. So it was just a funny, like, it popped up, like, that's kind of funny because we just talked about, is he really appreciated by the band? What's the situation like there? And here he's going off playing some other dates with a side project. It's like, you just kind of wonder what, not to think there's anything necessarily wrong with Anthrax, but again, that's been a very complicated situation, and it's kind of cool to see him able to just jump off and do something on his own.
Definitely.
So just a kind of a fun story to wrap up what is our news segment of the week. That takes us to kind of a news segment that we've decided to embark on the Nerdcast empire, and that is our question of the month. And the thought process is we're always thinking, and I think anybody who does content for a living or even as a side project, you're trying to find ways to get people more engaged in what you're doing and not make it so much us talking to the listener as much as an interaction. And of course, we have the live chat. If you join us live on twitch.tv/NerdcastEmpire every Thursday and Sunday, or almost every Thursday and Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern, you can chat with us, and, we'll mention the chat, talk about it, discuss things. We're always certainly open to that. Of course, we have our Discord, which we have linked in the live chat right now. You can join our Discord. And we're going to have this question of the month, and we're starting basic, really simple question. What is your favorite metal band and why? So what we would like people to do is we would like people to go onto our Discord, join our Discord, and either type your response, or record up to a 60-second clip of you telling us who your favorite metal band is and why. As I mentioned on the Discord, try to keep it PG-13 as best as possible, just to keep our YouTube friends happy when I send it over there, so YouTube doesn't have a fit and take it down later on. But, this is an opportunity to try to get more people involved. And the plan will be is that I will give a question of the month, and then we will discuss the answers on the first episode of the next month, which will be coming up in February. So the first Sunday of February, anybody who submitted audio, we'll put it in the podcast. If people have written answers, we'll talk about it. If nobody's done anything, Mike and I will tell you who our favorite metal bands are. That's completely okay as well. But the goal is to try to get some engagement, and we'll give you the next question of the month on that same episode, and then we'll do the same thing kind of going forward. So I just think it's just an opportunity that, we talked about this off the air, to try to kind of find out what our listeners are into and kind of get an idea of where they're coming from in their metal journey. And I hope people take advantage of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of to your point, we can talk at people forever. That's fine. But it's a lot more enjoyable when there is some collaboration there and more of a conversation. And yeah, I'd love to know what people's opinions are. I mean, I certainly have my own opinions, what my favorite metal bands are, but maybe some people will make a compelling argument that might make me want to look into some other bands a little more thoroughly.
Yeah, I think that's the point of any of these questions of the month is, we're not necessarily looking to change people's opinions as much as just find out where other people are coming from. And like you said, discover new bands, or maybe give a second listen to a band that maybe I didn't appreciate properly. And I think on this podcast, we've discovered so many new bands and bands that have been doing this for a long time that maybe just never jumped onto our radar. And, it's always great to hear about those bands. So my hope is that through this question of the month, we'll be able to identify new bands, add to the conversation, get more people involved, maybe eventually find people who want to have guest appearances on the podcast, because,
awesome.
We can bring people in Discord, once we kind of build up a relationship and know they're not going to come on here and tank our podcast. But, that's
good luck. We're almost already in the tank, so we're
well on our way.
Yeah. We can do that ourselves. Thanks.
But it's just anything to try to get some more engagement, I think, is the plan. So,
well, it's interesting too, because I think back to what my opinions are, and it's possible that my favorite band may not be my favorite band anymore, but for the time that they were, it was a really important. It was kind of a personal thing. It was you got into a band at a certain age for a certain reason. There's a story there, and I think even if you've moved on to other bands, I think there's a connection that's worth talking about and worth kind of sharing.
Yeah, I think then that's kind of the whole idea of it is it's not just don't just type a one word answer. I want to know why.
Metallica, because they rock.
Yeah, I mean maybe that's possible,
right,
but.
Nice.
Give me a reason. Is the first concert you went to, was it an album that your older sibling or mom and dad had you listen to, or it's just something you heard on the radio, or you heard on this podcast even? Maybe there was a band that we picked for this podcast.
Jamiroquai, Virtual Insanity.
Maybe. That's a great song, but I don't know if they qualify as metal in this case. We'll get to maybe favorite band as well.
The dude could move without moving. He was in this magic room.
I mean, it's certainly magic, for sure. Yeah. I don't know if it's metal, but it is magic. Hat. Yes, most certainly. So please take advantage of that. I think it's something that we would like to do, and we're going to start monthly to give people 3 or 4 weeks to come up with an idea and maybe chime in. And I'll be reminding people as we go through the month to let people know when this is coming up. But it'll be the first Sunday in February is when we will find out what everybody's favorite metal band.
If we get enough responses, we can do a tier list of your responses and tell you how bad they are.
Possibly. We don't want to discourage people from giving their opinions going forward because, obviously we would like to be able to do this every month. And like I said, continue to build our community here with the Nerdcast Empire. So that's our new feature, question of the month. What is your favorite metal band and why? That is our question for the month of January. We will be looking at the responses of that coming up in February. But it is now time, as always, to get to our new music. And couple of things. Number one, I don't think you gave me the songs that you were interested in.
did
So
not.
while you get those looked up, and we'll just play them on the fly because sometimes that happens. A good time to remind everybody of the format. Of course, each and every week, Mike will go through and pull from a couple of different sources the releases for a given date. And he will go through, and once he's made that list, he will go through and create a YouTube playlist, which has just appeared in the chat. And he will pull a song from each of those new releases on that given date and put them in the playlist as long as he can find them. And then we go through and review them, and we each pick two albums from these bands that we would like to spotlight on the podcast. This week, we're talking the music of December the 20th. So, again, not a huge list to pick from this week, as bands clearly deciding not to release music at the end of December or early January, which we have now found out and we can adjust for next year.
Yeah.
But, we still found 4 really good bands and 4 really good albums to spotlight this week. Will we find 4 next week? I don't know. You're gonna have to come back and find out, because I have a feeling it could be a little more challenging next week. Having said that, it is time to get to Mike's picks, and Mike, as always, will have 2 picks. So let's get to what your first pick of the week is.
I threw the songs in the Discord, by the way.
All right, I'll look those up while you start talking about your first pick.
Fantastic. All right, so for my first pick, it's kind of funny. We've been talking about, almost every week we seem to talk about Queensryche or Jeff Tate, and lately we've talked about Nevermore, and obviously Sanctuary being the precursor to Nevermore. So I was kind of excited when I ran into this band who are very much in that same kind of classic progressive metal vein. That being said, that band is Deadly Magic, and this is their debut EP. They are a German progressive band, and that EP is As Nightmares Gorged the Earth.
Certainly an interesting title, and pretty
Relatable.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. Cover art as well. But definitely interested in hearing more about these guys.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, it's their debut EP. This band was started by the guitarist and vocalist of the band Messerschmitt, Mike Yegzentes. Despite having a thrash and speed-oriented metal band in Messerschmitt, easy for me to say, Mike wanted to branch out and explore other musical passion of his, which was American progressive metal. Think bands like Queensryche, Sanctuary, Crimson Glory, Fate's Warning. Like I mentioned, we talk about Queensryche quite often, and just recently with the potential return of Nevermore, Sanctuary's kind of been in the news too. So running into this band was really cool. Evidently, in 2020, some big world event happened, which kind of gave him time to pursue this project. I guess he had songs kind of laying around that were in this vein, and he finally had some time due to some shutdowns to actually get to work on it. The band is rounded out by Thorben Schulz on lead guitar, Yannick Zwenscher on bass, Daniel Bale on drums, and Alexis Roy Petit on vocals. Their Bandcamp explains their sound fairly well, saying, totaling 24 incredibly epic minutes, As Nightmares Gorge the Earth is an infinitely ascending spire of dark, alluring energy, and indeed, deadly magic. With absurdly sharp execution, the quintet proceed to weave tales of high fantasy and grim allegory. You can nearly see the wizards and warriors across the sonic landscape. I don't know if I saw them, but I could nearly see them. Listening to the tracks, you can definitely hear kind of old Queensryche. The vocalist, Alexis Roy Petit, has a very Jeff Tate, Warrell Dane, kind of even some Bruce Dickinson sound to his voice, which is certainly never a bad thing. Really excited to see if these guys keep going with this. I did check out his other band, which is good as well, Messerschmitt, but definitely more just straight up speed thrash metal. But as far as this goes, there's 4 tracks on it. It's pretty easy to get through, so check out the whole thing. The song that I picked to take a listen to is the track Another Eye Beckons.
And a reminder, if you're listening on the podcast network, wherever you get your podcasts, we will not have the audio clips on there. So if you want to hear the audio clips, you got to come live on twitch.tv/NerdcastEmpire or go to our YouTube VODs channel, and hopefully YouTube hasn't decided to mute it when you get there. Let's check this out now. This is Deadly Magic, their opening EP, As Nightmares Gorge the Earth. This is the opening track off that EP, Another Eye Beckons, and we'll check that out right now.
Sense another side free.
I definitely hear the Queensryche comparison. Definitely some some very heavy influences there, but they've got a great sound, and definitely interested in going back and checking out this EP.
Yeah, could always use more music like that for sure. But it's funny too when you talk about Nevermore coming back. It's like maybe they should listen to this guy's voice. Maybe he could jump in and take over for Warrell Dane. But we'll see.
Hopefully, we're not going to steal your lead singer right after you guys just got started. But certainly maybe somebody that'll be on the radar for that one. But really looking forward to catching the rest of that EP and whatever these guys decide to do next. So that is Deadly Magic, Mike's first pick of the week. As always, you have 2 picks. What do you have for pick number 2?
Yeah, so for pick number 2, we are going to England with a melodic power metal band, female-fronted at that. This is their 3rd studio album following 2020's Mirrored Revenge and 2021's Constantine. The band is Sorceress of Sin, and the album is Enea.
Yeah, the song off the playlist I really, really dug from these guys. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to go through the whole album, but it's another group with a really good sound.
Yeah, absolutely, and a band that just recently signed with Wormhole Death Records back in November, which, just being kind of the first full year that we've covered music to this degree, it's interesting to kind of watch that label seem to just constantly expand. I kind of wonder what they're going to look like by the end of 2025. Are they going to be right up there with that litany of like big labels that we always seem to go back to because they have quite a few really solid artists? But kind of going back to the band in question here, Sorceress of Sin. Band is comprised of Lisa Skinner on vocals, Daniel McKinder on bass, Paul Skinner on drums, Constantine Kanikis on guitars, and Tom McLean on keyboards and orchestral arrangements. Kind of interesting, Tom McLean, like I noticed on the band's Bandcamp, they referenced the website of the production studio that they work at, and it's actually his studio. So I don't know if he just happened to be in the band because he also produces their records, but kind of cool. I mean, it's certainly not a bad thing to have a guy in the band that can handle that end of the music as well. But yeah, in the press release regarding the signing, they mentioned Sorceress of Sin's prior 2 albums, and citing their performance at the 2021 Bloodstock Festival as a big standout moment for the band. I guess their live show is something to behold for sure. This album delves into Greek mythology, channeling the power of the Olympian gods into their music. They tell you to expect a breathtaking fusion of epic storytelling and heavy metal. As far as the music goes, it is some pretty awesome epic power metal. It's a really enjoyable listen. Lisa Skinner has a crazy good voice. She kind of can go from that just standard female-fronted power metal vocal to operatic vocals, which you'll hear on a song like Nymphet. If you're kind of curious about the guys, you can check out the video for the song The Quest on YouTube. It'll give you a pretty good indication of what their style and sound is all about. Definitely kind of the high fantasy, the kind of video you'd want to shoot if you could shoot a music video. Mm-hmm. That being said, standout tracks on the album include Odile, Reina, Poseidon, Trickster, and Artisan. It was really tough to come up with a sample of what to play for these guys because there are so many just really cool parts in so many of their songs, but like in most cases, a lot of those weren't like your obvious, like, hey, I'm going to pick it up right here at the chorus. Like, it was really weird, so it made the choice difficult. But the track I did decide to run with is the first track on the album, Odile.
Let's check that out now. Again, this is Sorceress of Sin with their release Enea. This is Odile, the opening track to that album. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a band that doesn't necessarily have like the traditional hooks that you can just be like, play this chorus, and it definitely feels like it's more.
The song feels more like a journey than like a build to like one big crescendo. But that being said, you even have a track that's almost 12 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like it. The music just goes, and it's definitely an enjoyable listen.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to getting to listen to the rest of this album. Sorceress of Sin, their new release, out on December the 20th. So make sure you check that out. Those were Mike's 2 picks of the week. As always, I have 2 picks as well, and we are going to Portugal for our first pick. This is a group that defines themselves as symphonic power pop metal from Portugal. This is, I believe they are Master Die with the album Fructus, the Master Zodiac. Definitely an interesting name and a interesting concept. This band was formed in 2019. This is their 4th full-length album. Their Metal Archives page in the section that has similar artists only lists one, and it was Lacuna Coil. I guess I can kind of see a little bit of comparison there with Lacuna Coil. They just got a great symphonic sound with great harmonies, great melodic metal. Really enjoyed this listen. Sometimes when you get into these bands that are maybe I want to say horror inspired, but definitely have like an occultish type vibe to them, you worry that the music won't be accessible. They tend to be like doomish metal, and it can be kind of a drag. This was not. This was very much more upbeat and really made it really easy to get into what they were doing. Their self-description of the album, which is probably the best way to kind of describe it, it says, with 13 incredible tracks, including a powerful intro that sets the tone for the Zodiac reimagined by Master Die, this album is a true masterpiece. Each song honors the essence of those born in every month, delivering a unique and captivating journey through the stars with a darker melodic twist. It is definitely interesting, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it had a great sound all the way through. Standout tracks include February Center, Mayhem in the Vortex, Regal Eclipse, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast today, Solitary Ember. So let's check these guys out. This is Master Die with their new album, Fructus, the Master Zodiac. This is the 8th track off of that album. It is Solitary Ember. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, these guys have a very interesting sound. It's like I said, much more upbeat than what maybe if you just read what the album was about, you would think it was a little more doom and gothic. But honestly, it's just really catchy and great. Everybody really doing a great job. Vocals are great, guitar, drums. It's just really well put together. I really enjoyed this one. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, just from that clip, it you kind of get this like brightness from it that you don't expect from like something that also has a gothic edge to it, which it does as well, but a little more modern sounding than a lot of the power metal we run into quite often. But yeah, definitely worth checking out more of.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. I mean, typically we do some of it. The power metal, melodic especially, does tend to be dated sounding. This really wasn't. So definitely check those guys out. Master Die, really enjoyed that release from them. As always, I have 2 picks, and our second pick we're going to get to, as was so often happens on this podcast, is we come across these bands. They've been doing this for a long time, and this is another one. This band, a German folk metal band founded in Potsdam in the early 90s. It's Subway to Sally, and this is their new album, Post Mortem. This is their 15th studio album. They also have 6 live albums and 2 greatest hits releases. They have, really that folk and medieval influence, later adding gothic and metal elements. As was mentioned in their Wikipedia, they're a metal band that uses a lot of untraditional, non-traditional instruments like bagpipes, shawm, violin, hurdy-gurdy, and lute. So definitely gives you a different sound than a lot of the other metal bands that are out there. Their last album was supposed to be their last album, and so it did really well, and of course makes the title of this album even more apropos, post-mortem, because they really thought they were done, but they're not. They're continuing on, and they continue on with a really strong effort here. It's kind of an article talking about how, times sometimes can feel dark, especially everything that has happened over the past few years, kind of another reference to, the post-pandemic world, but it mentions people longing for distraction, for forgetting, for celebration and freedom, even if only for a moment. So it's kind of that, looking for something to celebrate on the other side, and I think that's kind of what they were going for here. They also kind of went a little bit different direction, because typically their lyrics are almost always completely in German. But for this album, they enlisted their label mates, War Kings, to come on as guest performers, which allowed them to add some English lyrics in some of the choruses. I think that allows it to maybe even have even more of a wide reach than it would if it was strictly just a German album. But it's a great album. Even though most of the lyrics are in German, I think it's a great sound. I think people are really going to dig it. Standout tracks include Phoenix, Postmortem, Herns in der Rhein, and the track we're going to check out, Stahl auf Stahl, which is the song featuring War Kings. So we're going to check this out now. This is Subway to Sally, their Postmortem album. This is the 9th track off of this album. It is Stahl auf Stahl. So let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Wir sind stets zum Kampf bereit, wie schon tausendmal. Stahl auf Stahl. We are heroes of all time. No one will defeat us. We are heroes, we stay strong. Viva la Victoria. Wir überwinden jeden Berg, durchqueren jedes Tal. Stahl auf Stahl.
If you like your German metal, this is another great entry right before the end of 2024. Subway to Sally releasing their 15th studio album. And again, it's got a very unique sound to it. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
I feel like bands over here don't incorporate non-traditional instruments nearly enough. I think it's always cool when you run into that. But this is really cool stuff. I'm really disappointed I haven't been more aware of this band up until now. Kind of interesting that they wanted to make something kind of more positive coming out of the pandemic, and in order to do that, you do kind of need some lyrics that have a wider accessibility, I think. But pretty cool move on their part. But yeah, definitely good stuff.
Yeah, I really dug this album. I think both the ones I had this week are really easy listens, even though some of the themes sometimes feel a little heavy just because of the style of music they play. They do it in such a bright way that it makes it just a great listen. So check out.
It does kind of beg the question, though, obviously this band being around since the 90s, why were there no other German rock or metal bands that broke through over here?
Yeah, I mean, you had Rammstein obviously get through, and they obviously did a few covers of their songs in English, but their primary hits came through in German, and they hit.
And even the video for Du Hast, the one you remember is the German one. You don't remember the English lyrics there.
Right. So why weren't there others that slipped through that crack? It's hard to say. That's I think we talk about it a lot. Sometimes when you hear some of these bands, you just think this band should have been just as big, and obviously have had a lot of success, because you don't do 30 plus years of music without having some level of success, and have 15 albums. And obviously their last album's so successful that they now have a post-mortem album. They thought they were dead, and turns out they're not, and maybe stronger than ever. So really exciting. But check out Subway to Sally. Really dug their release this week. That will do it for our new releases this week. It is time to head into the vault, where Mike and I will give you classic albums that you need to check out. And of course, each of us have our own gimmick, and Mike's gimmick is starting to wind down, as a few weeks ago he went to Wikipedia and found the list of all the glam bands that Wikipedia lists. and has been going through A through Z to choose a band each week and sample their music, and got a very interesting pick this week as we get to the letter T. This was a band I've certainly heard of, and they've got a really outstanding story to go with this album that you've picked this week. So who do you have for the vault?
Yeah, so looking at the letter T, there were certainly a lot of really good options that I could have gone with. This one, though, I went the direction I did because I actually recently bought the album. It's one I was familiar with for years, but I actually wanted to own the physical copy of it, and I did. I went out and bought it. But that being said, the album that we're going for the vault, the band is the band Tuff, and this is their first studio album. Came out in 1991. What Comes Around Goes Around.
Yeah, I remember these guys, obviously, over the years, and it's another band that still exists, which is always a great thing in the vault where you've got somebody that's still going at it. But this is an interesting story above and beyond just the album itself.
Yeah, for sure. So this album was kind of the first introduction I had to the band, probably late 90s, early 2000s. According to Wikipedia, something I didn't know was prior to adopting the more glam metal style, they were actually a heavier band, and even at one point opened for an act like Flotsam and Jetsam back in Arizona. So that's kind of wild. But yeah, they're a Phoenix, Arizona formed glam band formed by Jorge Desant and Todd Chase. After some lineup changes, they fell into their classic lineup featuring Stevie Rochelle on vocals, Jorge and Todd still, and then Michael Raimondo. This album did feature a hit power ballad because all hard rock bands and albums in 1991 had the hit power ballad. The song "I Hate Kissing You Goodbye" did reach number 3 on Dial MTV back in the day, but sadly, a year later, this band was dropped by the record label Atlantic. Having record label issues in general, the lead singer Stevie Rochelle started his own label in the mid-90s, RLS Records, where the RLS meant both record labels suck and Rochelle's lyrics and songs. This dude's kind of got an interesting story just in general. On top of having his own record label that he created in 2020 or 2001, easy for me to say, he with Tuff released a compilation, The History of Tuff, which had the song American Hairband, which is a parody of Kid Rock's American Badass. Probably a better song, if we're being honest, but kind of a similar theme to the song off of the album that I'm talking about, What Comes Around Goes Around, the All New Generation, which is kind of an anthem just celebrating classic rock and rock of the 80s. And in American Hairband's case, also throwing shade at the grunge era that was at least partially responsible for the demise of the hairband genre in general. But moving into more what he had going on, we talked a few weeks back about Megadeth Arizona, the website that Megadeth had in the mid-90s that was like groundbreaking at the time. This guy also had one, started back in 1998 called Metal Sludge. There's an article on Metal Sludge's website going back to their 20th anniversary, kind of talking about how it came about and all of that. And essentially what started out is him trying to promote work that he was doing in 1998. He reached out to a contact he had at Metal Edge who not only didn't return his call, but later to a colleague, someone that they mutually knew, kind of made it sound like she had no idea why this dude was even trying to promote his work because that kind of music was so over at that point in time. So after this dude created his own record label, he then decided that similarly, because you had these major music publications not covering their work, I need to go ahead and just make my own publication. And thus the website Metal Sludge was created. And, you know, there was a point in time where that was kind of where you go to find out about hair metal stuff because mainstream publications just didn't care anymore. But on top of that, in the mid-90s, he also did a side project relating to his fandom of the Green Bay Packers, which evidently sold pretty well too. So this guy's kind of been all over the place. He was also featured on the documentary that was just done on Paramount Plus, where he kind of talks about what it was like becoming the lead singer of a band kind of in late stages of the hair metal movement and still getting to kind of enjoy that success. But I think kind of having a more grounded approach to it than maybe some of the bands that were around for a longer period of time. Going into the album, for a hair metal album in 1991, I think it's really enjoyable. You know, a lot of people may dismiss it as being unoriginal or derivative, which a lot of the music probably was by then. But tracks like Rucka Pit Bridge, The All New Generation, I Hate Kissing You Goodbye, So Many Seasons, Forever Yours, Wake Me Up, Good Guys Wear Black, all stand out really good tracks. And I think if you're into that kind of music in general and you haven't checked out Tuff and this album, you kind of owe it to yourself to do it.
Yeah, I think it's always great to find these bands that should have probably been bigger than what they ended up, but whether it was a dealing with timing of when they kind of got started or when they had their big album and what the music landscape looked like at the time. Sometimes it just didn't work out that way. You can kind of see, like, I think you kind of hinted at or discussed, about Stevie Rochelle kind of having a reputation seemingly of being kind of a down-to-earth type of guy that doesn't seem like your typical rocker from that era. It's almost telling because you go to the Wikipedia page and he's was involved in so many tribute albums to different bands where it's like clearly this dude was easy to work with, and a lot of these, on top of being talented, a lot of these record labels brought him in to record. I mean, he did both tributes to Journey and Styx in 2002, did vocals on Lights and Babe. Obviously, two pretty vocally challenging songs. He ended up doing another cover of Lights in 2009 on 80s hair metal goes classic. So, obviously, incredibly talented. It's just a shame that the band itself didn't maybe have more commercial success. But again, just the sign of the times. And I think, his the comment about the record label suck thing, like, clearly tells you that he never felt like they had his back even when things were good for bands like that, and certainly not when they got to the late 90s and they just wanted nothing to do with a band like that.
Yeah, it had to be an interesting perspective to be kind of an outsider and a big fan, and then kind of get thrust into that environment. Just the shock that you had to feel realizing that, like, once the labels thought they weren't going to make enough money off of you, they just didn't care anymore, and that had to have been pretty jarring. It's a shame, really, because again, at the end of the day, this type of music was no more or less authentic than anything else that's ever been created. It was just a sound, and for a period of time, a lot of people really liked it, and then out of nowhere, they were kind of told, "Hey, you shouldn't like this anymore."
Yeah, and then they found it hard to find because, I mean, a lot of as we have discovered over the 47 weeks we've done this podcast, and we knew even before then, but it's really been clear. A lot of these bands continued on. They released albums. Yeah. There were bands that we've discovered that have new albums over the course of this podcast that started at this time and released albums that just fell through the cracks because they were just wrong place, wrong time. That music was still out there, but because the record execs had moved on to grunge and basically said, we're not going to even give you any airtime anymore, these bands kind of had to hide in the shadows for a while and play to their dedicated fans, but never really had the chance to continue that upward trajectory that they really rightfully should have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have to point out, too, when I did buy that copy of What Comes Around Goes Around recently off of Amazon, it actually came, and I kind of realized when I purchased it that I was purchasing it from the band, and it actually arrived to me with a personalized autograph from Stevie Rochelle and a guitar pick. So, that's just kind of going the extra mile when you really don't have to.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, again, famous people, been around a long time, don't have to do this. They could just send you the album, and that would be perfectly fine. But to go that extra mile to somebody who's buying their stuff in 2025, like, that's really cool. And I think that's something that a lot of bands could learn from. Just something simple. It doesn't take very long unless you're just moving copious amounts of albums.
Sure.
To just thank the people that are still out there listening to this music and keeping it alive. So really cool. Definitely check out Tuff. Any of their stuff, obviously, definitely worth checking out. And they're still around. They're still active. So if they come near your area, go out and see these guys live. Of course, my gimmick, if you will, I thought we were going to bring it to an end last week, and then I realized there was an album that this week that I did specifically want to talk about. So we continue on with the year-by-year albums of importance to me. Started many, many weeks ago, back the year 1969 with Chicago Transit Authority. We were up to the year 2011. We'll continue on this until I just can't find an album that I want to talk about. And then I think we're going to jump into picking Frontiers Records bands that are on their label or have been on their label A to Z. But for now, we continue on, and we're going to talk about the releases of 2011. We'll get to some of the ones that are honorable mentions, if you will, before we get to the main event. And, of course, Mike will tell us all the ones we missed from 2011. Anthrax comes up again, and it seems like this happens so often on our podcast. We talk about a band, and they pop back in. Anthrax had worship music in September of 2011. Of course, that was the return of Joey Belladonna to the band in 2011. Certainly a good album, Fight 'Em Till You Can't, The Devil You Know, In the End, I'm Alive. The singles off of worship music, really good stuff from them. 13, the 13th studio album from Megadeth, came out in October of 2011 in Japan, and then November 2011 in the United States. Was the first release since David Ellison had returned to the band. Sudden Death, Public Enemy #1, Never Dead, Whose Life Is It Anyways? The singles off of that album, but as is the case with Megadeth, definitely should check it out, and we'll double back to Mike in a moment to kind of get his thoughts on that one a little bit more in detail. Age of the Joker from Ed Guy, August of 2011. One that I'm not as familiar with, but there's some really good tracks on here as well. There's also a bonus disc that includes a cover of Come On Feel the Noise that was available in special and limited editions of the album. So I don't think I've ever heard their cover of that song, but definitely worth checking out. Again, we'll come back to that in a moment. One honorable mention from Japan is the 8th studio album of Do As Infinity, they were just as original as Megadeth with their naming. They titled that album 8. No. Notable because it included the song Kimi ga Inai Mirai, which was the opening theme to the final season of Inuyasha. So that certainly notable. Do As Infinity's great. Always worth checking their stuff out. But the album that ends up getting my pick, and the reason I'm continuing on this week was, this was one of those albums that if you go through my collection and think, of the top albums I own, my all-time favorites, this one would be up near the top. This is the 2011 release from the Foo Fighters. It is Wasting Light. This was the first Foo Fighters album I actually bought, physical copy, and this was just a really interesting album. Even before we get to the tracks off of it, this was a decision by the band to basically strip down and create a very raw-sounding album. The Wikipedia article talks about, the thought that, they could go into the studio and make another really polished album, but, is that really what they want to do? So instead, they go to Dave Grohl's house, and they bring in a bunch of analog recording equipment, and they basically record the whole thing on tape instead of using any digital recording for the album. And really, the result is a very raw sound, a very live sound to the album that is really unlike anything that Foo Fighters had released. They brought in Butch Vig to oversee the album. Of course, he was known for working on Nirvana's Nevermind, among many, many, many other successful albums that he worked on. But of course, that's where Dave Grohl knew him from. And so they go into the garage and they basically start recording this album. And it's just from front to back, it's just really, really outstanding. The album also marked the return of Pat Smear as an official member of the band. First time since 1997 that he had been on an album. But you had, guest musicians including Bob Mould of Husker Du, Chris Novoselic, Jesse Green, Rami Jaffrey, and Fee Waybill on the album. And again, it just has such a very, very raw sound to it, and it's one that I almost always will listen to front to back. But if I had to pick standout tracks, Bridge Burning right off the front, Rope, Dear Rosemary, Arlandria, These Days, Miss the Misery, I Should Have Known, and then Walk closes out the album. But it's just really fun. And at the end of this, which I was going to pull my physical copy because it has a piece of it, and I didn't grab it. They decided to cut up all the master tapes and include a snippet of them in each of the albums. So I somewhere have a little snippet of the master tape because, as Dave Grohl mentions in Wikipedia, everybody wanted the masters. It was a big fight with all the record label and everybody else wanted to have these masters because they were so special. So he decided to destroy them and pass them out to the fans, which sounds like a very Dave Grohl thing to do. But just really outstanding album from these guys, and certainly my favorite release of theirs amongst many, many great releases. Before we get to some of the other ones I mentioned, Mike, your thoughts on this Foo Fighters album?
Yeah, it's a great album for sure. And I think, to their point, this is just how rock music should be made. It feels, when you listen to something and it's too perfect, there's something about it that feels dead. It doesn't have that same kind of liveliness that something recorded on analog equipment and recorded live to some degree is going to have. And I think I would much rather for my rock albums to feel imperfect and alive than totally, you don't want the drums to sound like they were done electronically. You want maybe a bad note every now and then. I think that's rock and roll.
Yeah, and I think that was what they were going for. Like, hey, if you misplay a note or if something's a little off, we're just going to live with it. We're not going to go back and fix it every time, because that's the other part of it too, is tape has always been expensive. It's really expensive in 2011 because nobody's doing it that way anymore. So you didn't have, yes, they had the money if they wanted to have 7,000 takes of everything, but the point of it was not to basically lose money on this album. So you do get a limited number of takes, and the editing process becomes much more manual, just like it was in the old days, and that's just really cool to me.
It's funny now that if they were to go and do this for their next album, whenever that is, whenever the hiatus or sabbatical that Dave Grohl's on ends, how do you do it now? Like, do you offer parts of the master tape with the vinyl release because people aren't really buying CDs? It's weird the way, this was 13 years ago, 14 years ago, and just the way the industry just shifts around. It's just, I miss this though.
Yeah. I think there's just something really authentic to this, and it's a really cool time in history. And there's a documentary on this album, and if you do know these tracks or you know the album and you haven't watched the documentary, it's definitely worth watching just to see kind of how it's all made, and just really, really cool stuff from Foo Fighters. Before we get to the stuff I missed, let's kind of double back to the stuff I didn't miss that are bands that are certainly on your radar. Let's talk a little bit about some of the albums I did mention besides the Foo Fighters.
The Anthrax album was certainly solid. It's interesting listening to some of that now, in that Joey Belladonna sounds great on it, but the more like that more modern sound of Anthrax feels like something that you could plug in either Joey Belladonna or John Bush and it would work. It's kind of weird. Like, neither one feels wrong or necessarily more right than the other there, but Belladonna sounds great, and it was just, got to see them live kind of off of this album, and that was really cool. Ed Guy, Age of the Joker. Honestly, I don't have the bonus disc of this one, so I didn't know that they had covered Come On, Feel the Noise. There's also a song on that bonus disc called Aleister Crowley's Memorial Boogie. I don't know what that is, but I really want to hear it now. Ed Guy's always solid. Robin Hood, Nobody's Hero, Rocket Casual, 2 Out of 7's a great song.
I'm really interested to see if the new Avantasia album sounds like Ed Guy, because that first track
sounds like an Ed Guy song.
It sounds like an Ed Guy song, and that is really fascinating to me.
And that was funny because when they promoted it on Facebook, a lot of the comments were like that, and kind of like, this isn't Avantasia. This is what we expect from you guys as this big unit. It's like, you already have this band that sounds that way. Like, why does Avantasia need to sound that way too? So it'll be interesting with all the guest appearances that are bound to be on the new Avantasia. I'm sure you'll still get that same big sound on a lot of the songs. We'll probably look back on it and just kind of wonder why this was the first track that you wanted to debut to people. Like, it may seem like a bit of a curious decision in hindsight. Megadeth's 13, really cool album. Sudden Death, Never Dead, both songs that were in video games.
Mm-hmm.
Sudden Death's on a Guitar Hero game, which was really cool. Interesting thing about the album too is they took some tracks that were only kind of available in kind of rare occasions and mostly kind of in demo form, and they finished them and put them on the album. So you had tracks like Black Swan, Millennium of the Blind, what was it? Crown of Worms. Is that the other one that I totally didn't comment on, but I seem to recall that being on there. Let's see. Oh, New World Order. That was the one.
Okay.
Yeah. Crown of Worms was not on that one. I think that was on their re-release of one of the albums from around that era, either Cryptic Writings or Euthanasia, maybe. I'd have to go back and double check that. But yeah, I mean, you had Black Swan, Millennium of the Blind, New World Order, all songs that existed in some form that they kind of gave a little polish to and added to the album. So kind of cool, but otherwise, Sudden Death, Never Dead, 13, Deadly Nightshade, all really cool songs. As far as what you missed, Alice Cooper did release Welcome to My Nightmare, 2 being the number 2. Not a bad album. Had tracks like Caffeine, The Nightmare Returns, I'll Bite Your Face Off. Just kind of standard Alice Cooper stuff. You either like it or you don't. Dream Theater released A Dramatic Turn of Events, which was the first album to not feature Mike Portnoy. Had Mike Mangini on drums. It was fine. I'm really glad that Portnoy's back, but they weren't any less competent of musicians without him, but maybe a certain creative edge that he brought was kind of missing. But you did have tracks like On the Backs of Angels, Build Me Up, Break Me Down, Lost Not Forgotten, Breaking All Illusions. Dream Theater's not going to release bad music.
No.
Iced Earth released Dystopia in 2011. Really cool album by them as usual. Tracks like Dystopia, Anthem, Anguish of the Youth, Dark City, and Tragedy and Triumph. Scar Symmetry released The Unseen Empire. Thing about Scar Symmetry is they've mastered the art of the opening track. They have some of the coolest first tracks of any band out there, and this is no different. Check out the song The Anomaly, which starts the album. Really cool. You also have Illuminoid Dream Sequence and Extinction Mantra. Just really cool, kind of melodic, somewhat death, technical, metal, good stuff. Finally, you had Trivium releasing In Waves, which was a tremendous album too. Maybe not the heights of Shogun in my opinion, but still really solid. Tracks like the title track In Waves, Black, Built to Fall, Caustic Are the Ties That Bind, and A Gray So Dark. Maybe not the same volume of music throughout the year that we've seen in some of the previous years, but still a good chunk of good music in 2011.
Yeah, and we'll see what 2012 holds. If I can find something else to pick, we'll continue down that road. And if not, we'll pivot out of there and move on to something new. But still a lot of really good stuff in the year 2011. And that is going to bring our podcast to a close for another week. And a reminder that next week we are scheduled to do the music of December the 27th. I'm not sure whether there will be enough music from December the 27th or not to do it. Just tune in to find out next Sunday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We'll be back next Thursday, or this Thursday, with another episode of Anime Thursdays. I'm not sure what we're doing this Thursday, but you can tune in and find out 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Thursday. And again, next week, another episode of Music Weekly. We'll be talking the music of December the 27th or something. I'm not sure what it would be otherwise, but we'll be doing that next week. Reminder, check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. Join our Discord. Answer our question of the month. Your favorite metal band and why, and we'll be talking about those in a few weeks here on the Nerdcast Empire. Big thanks to Chris and to Rachel for joining us in the chat tonight. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast, and a big thanks to you, the listener, wherever you may be, whatever platform you're listening to us on. We really appreciate it. That is going to wrap things up for Mike and the entire crew. I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.